A man walks into a bar. Stop me if you've heard this one before, he says. A pair of exquisite mage locks faintly glow beneath the worn leather duster. You look like shit. The bearded man hunkered at the table before him doesn't look up from his tankard. We've been here before. The newcomer pulls up his chair, sweeping his long coat aside as he sits down and props his cake dust boots on top of the table. Creatures of habit, I reckon. Glancing over his shoulder, he gestures at the barmaid, twirling two gloved fingers in the air and then pointing at the table. I'd say it's good to see you, Cain, but it never is. The bearded man empties his tankard without looking up. The heavy armor encasing his torso and his shoulders creaks with his every move. You've got something to say? Get to it. I'm on the clock. Everyone says you're dead, Mags. The bearded man reaches up with his right hand, a mechanical monstrosity attached to a stump of his severed bicep, and crushes the steel tankard in front of him. It's proving those bastards wrong that keeps me going. Ashith Magnus had seen it all. He had been a staunch patriot of Signar and the right-hand enforcer of his king, Vinter Railthrone. Before the coup that sent Vinter into exile, he had toiled as a mercenary to raise an army that would act as a vanguard for his king's return, clearing the way for Vinter's scorn invasion, and when wrongfully accused of treachery, Magnus had been tortured by Vinter's pain-givers before abandoning the exiled king. Before his betrayal, Magnus, ever the advocate of Signar's predominance, sought out the illegitimate child of Vinter Railthrone in an effort to restore the rightful bloodline to the throne. He was rewarded for his patriotism, pardoned for his crimes as a traitor, and restored to a position of leadership in Signar's military once more. After watching his protege and greatest nemesis, Coleman Stryker, perish defending Signar from Caldorian conquest, Magnus made his penitent stand for king and country against the Caldorian invaders, only then make another as demonic creatures from beyond came for the very souls of all humanity. After that, he parted ways from the military machine he had both served and railed against for decades. The barmaid drops two fresh tankards on the table between the men, and Cain places a handful of coins in her palm with a nod. Eyes wide, she takes up this crushed mug. Cain quickly drops a couple of coins inside it and puts the fingers to his lips, winking at her as she backs away. So you're telling me to selling your sword, or whatever you call that, Cain says over the top of his mug, nodding toward the foot-wide legendary blade, Foe Cleaver, leaning against the wall behind Magnus. Beside it is propped a custom-built rocket launcher with a warhead already loaded. Doesn't it look like you've been giving up trading bullets for paydays? Magnus pulls at his beard, his scarred blind eye catching one of the few rays of light penetrating the dank interior of the Backwater Tavern. The difference is, I've been consistent. Only ever fought for one side. Cain raises his tankard in a mock salute. Magnus clenches his mechanical fist, adjusting the tension on its actuators with his left hand. Some say the same about me. They might, but they'd be wrong, wouldn't they, Mags? You've got into this business as an idealist. You've had something to prove and a claim to stake, but you've served a lot more different masters, and each one of them demanded something different. So you gave each one their pound of flesh, but now it's hard to know what you stand for anymore. Then again, you were never in it for yourself. Cain shakes his head, perplexed, searching Magnus's one good eye for some clues as to his motives. I did what I had to, when I had to do it. Magnus sets his empty tankard down on the table, perhaps a little too hard. Cain shrugs and then nods, reaching forward and taking up the tankard before Magnus' massive mechanica fist can crush yet another. Not saying you're the picture of redemption, but there's a lot of people should thank you for some things you've done. More than you'll never know. Magnus raises both palms. I never liked parades. You don't like the benefits of wearing the livery either. Kane knocks back the rest of his tankard, pausing for an answer. That ain't the world that I fought for. Signar doesn't have a place for me anymore. Magnus opens and closes his mechanical fist. I'll go where I want to now. One for them, one for me. So what now then? If duty's not calling your name, what are you getting out of this anymore? Nothing but the coin. Outside the tavern, an engine roars. Growing closer, panic cries ring out. An alarm bell clangs. Kane shifts in his chair, hands reflexively dropping down to his sides as he looks over his shoulder for any sign of threat. That's my cue, Magnus says, pushing back from the table, taking up the sword and rocket launcher behind him. His eye pulses briefly with arcane fire. Time to go to work, Vic. Among the shanty town that makes up Terran Crag, the ramshackle tavern with its tilted shingled reading Luck's End is arguably the most well-kept structure in the crumbling mining settlement called home by more transient ne'er-do-wells than upstanding residents. With a rusty creak, the front door of the tavern opens. Magnus steps into the daylight, squinting as his eye adjusts to the brightness of the high noon sun. Before him is a belligerent pile of metal, posturing itself as the engine of war. A spiked cylinder, filled with frenzied swine, makes up its front, and a crude cannon mounted on top of spluttering smoke-belching furnace provides additional power to the machine's pig-propelled locomotion. Two ferro-repulsive bipedal warthogs with more brawn than brains control the meat thresher and its armament. Perched atop of the contraption is a third pharaoh, hulking in a mass compared to the others. He poses pompously, with a massive cleaver held beside him as his crimson cloak flutters in the desert wind. With a guttural rasp, the tusked creature speaks, shamelessly butchering each syllable as its coarsely spoken Signarian with intermediate porcine snorts. Asheth Magnus, the pharaoh says. Carver heard you were dead. A lot of that is going around these days, Magnus replies flatly, as his right leg shifts uncomfortably within the metal brace that supports it. Lord Carver is here to take the territory for Lord Carver's empire. The pharaoh puffs his chest up proudly and gestures to his entourage, assembled to his left and right of the meat thresher. Dozens of pharaoh brigands snort and squeal their support. A pair of massive creatures, abdominal parodies of upright walking wild boars with horrific mechanical limbs, wielding enormous axes, screech with unrestrained bloodlust in their eyes. The pharaoh says, You know Lord Carver, BMMD, Esquire the Third, tremble before your conqueror's might. Unimpressed, Magnus scratches absently at his beard, taking in the mass of pharaoh troops lined up in front of him. I gotta be honest, I know there's a lot of your kind running around here, but I don't think I have time to keep track of all the shit-talking wannabes trying to make a name by thinking that they can take a chunk out of something bigger than their worthless, pissant existence. So no, I don't know who the hell you are, and when you're done here, I ain't gonna remember scraping your piggy ass off the bottom of my boot. The pharaoh leader fumes, incensed, howling at the top of his lungs. Lord Carver will not be disrespected. He slaps the cannon next to him twice, indicating the gunner should prepare to fire. The bringer of the most massive destruction will now bring the most massive destruction upon you. The only thing that you're going to bring me is a payday. Magnus hoists the rocket launcher onto his left shoulder, zeroing in on the platform beneath Carver's feet. The feral gunner on the meat thresher, its aim off. A burst of fire riddles the corner of the Luck's End, shattering timbers. Without flinching, Magnus pulls the trigger on his launcher, rocketing the explosive projectile straight at Carver. The Pharaoh's leader squeals, dodges, and leaps to the ground as the rocket detonates on a cannon, shredding it to scrap. Brandishing his oversized sword, Carver's voice pitches higher like a shrieking swine. The louder he yells, "Kill him!" Spurred forward by Carver's fury, the massive warhogs charge forward while the horde of Pharaoh brigands open fire with their crude rifles. Bullets splinter the wood planking off of the tavern, shatter glass windows, and ricochet off Magnus's power field protected armor. Magnus wades into the fray, ducking and sidestepping a flurry of wild axe swings from the warhogs as the brigands swam around him with hatchets and swords. He sweeps Folklever in wide arcs around him, slicing through the throng of bipedal hogs, who wail like injured piglets. But the pack of pissed-off pork is overwhelming, and Magnus takes a blow from behind, one by one, of the warhog's cleavers. The power field generated by one of the arcane turbines on his back deflects what would have been a lethal strike to anyone else, but the impact sends him staggering, and he collapses to his knees. Arcane glimpses encircle him, and the ground beneath his feet goes soft, hindering his mobility to move, as Lord Carver weaves a spell from the edge of the surrounding mob. "All right, Vic," Magnus mutters as he struggles to get his braced leg underneath him. "It's time to get moving." Kane leans casually against the frame of the open tavern door, watching the skirmish unfold. He whistles unimpressed and nods towards the towering hulk of iron and steel as it lumbers out from behind the building. "Why, Magnus, I do believe you have outdone yourself this time." With a chainsaw in place of its left arm, a wrecking ball chained to its right, and an enormous rocket mounted on its shoulder, the autonomous machine that approaches is the embodiment of war. With a flash, Magnus summons a ring of glowing runes that dissolve into a wave of searing heat, cooking on an advancing Pharaoh alive. A second casting of the spell, and a second Pharaoh falls, but the mob keeps coming, and the warhogs, fueled by Carver's sorcerer's power, charge forward. The first warhog ducks low and gores at him with his massive tusks, sending Magnus sprawling face down in front of the pair of frying pan-sized hooves. "Invictus, let's go!" Magnus's eye pulses, and fiery runes explode around him. Out of sight, the steam engine roars. The pistons seethe as the ground shakes with accelerating claps of metallic thunder. Looming above him, the second warhog raises both cleavers above his head, ready to hack Magnus into thirds. A raging squeal bellows from its gaping maw just before its head disappears from its shoulders, momentarily displaced by a bladed iron sphere as big around as a cartwheel. A fountain of hot blood gushes over Magnus's as he rolls out of the way just as the headless corpse of the war beast collapses to the ground. Using Folklever to steady himself, Magnus rises to his feet in front of a monumental assemblage of steam-powered hydraulics, gnashing gears, and armored plating. He glowers at it. "You got a loose cortex coupling or something?" Twice the size of any standard military warjack, Invictus glares down at Magnus with baleful, burning eyes and huffs indignity, steam blowing from the grill in its face. Their consciousness linked through the unique bond only a warcaster and a warjack can share. The sense of Invictus are as Magnus's own. Though the enormous Omnitron's eyes, Magnus clocks the remaining warhog charging from behind. Without turning around, Magnus focuses his arcane power into the warjack, charging the cortex that gives the machine life and empowering its weapons. Just before the warhog can reach Magnus, the chainsaw, as tall as a man, that makes up Invictus's left arm spins up, its giant teeth blurring until they vanish. With only a small adjustment, Invictus repositions the blade directly in the path of the charging warbeast, and with a near-deafening grinding of metal on metal, he shreds off the right arm of the warhog. The beast howls in rage and launches itself at Invictus with its remaining arm, swinging its cleaver wildly. Magnus spins, eviscerating the war beast with a backward slash from foe cleaver, then follows up with an uppercut from his mechanical fist, connecting with the hog under its chin and laying it out cold. Incensed, the remaining Pharaoh brigands brandish their weapons and squeal furiously as they close in. "You finish up. I need a breather," Magnus says to Invictus, stepping aside as the warjack stalks towards the onrush of Rabid Pharaoh. His locomotive-sized steam plant bellowing, Invictus takes the mob head-on. Twin plumes of fire burst from a pair of nozzles on either side of its face grill, and they set 3 of the brigands ablaze. Another shrieks in agony as it's crushed under a massive mechanical foot, and with another step forward, Invictus swings his huge bladed ball and chain in a wide arc, mowing down Pharaoh, down like a scythe going through the wheat. What few brigands manage to invade the warjack's devastating attacks drop their weapons and backpedal in terror. But wait, there's more. The engine of the meat thresher screams, fire and ash bellowing from its smokestacks as its spiked crusher cylinder begins to rotate under the power of the 3 dozen squealing bores within it. The crusher rips up the earth as it barrows towards Invictus, building speed, stepping out of the sooty black cloud left in its wake. Carver appears, leveling his sword at Magnus, prepared to meet the hand of God. Carver cries in swine-slathered Sigarnian. Magnus sighs, "I forget you're still here. When I sever your head and feast on your entrails, you will remember Lord Carver for the rest of your life." Carver lowers his head and charges. Magnus raises an eyebrow. I think he lost something in translation. He raises his sword, ready to cross blades with the Pharaoh. Invictus turns towards the accelerating meat thresher, unleashing another goust of flame. Towards the massive battle engine, undeterred, the thresher driver steams towards the warjack, just as Invictus makes to raise his flail. But the vehicle's pig-driven grinder is upon him too soon. Mowing over the flail and sweeping under the crushing cylinder, Invictus lurches forward as his arm is pulled under the crusher, and the full momentum of the battle engine crashes into it. But the monstrous warjack plants his feet, digging into the earth, and upends the meat thresher, halting it entirely as the piggies within the cylinder tumble and squeal in distress. Just steps before he's in striking distance, Carver reaches behind his back and produces a short-barreled scattergun. He pulls the trigger, peppering Magnus with a heavy shot that rips through his cloak and opens a gash in the flesh beneath his left eye. Magnus swings foe cleaver before him, colliding with Carver's hand of God, stopping his charge. "You've got a cleaver? I've got a cleaver," Magnus growls through gritted teeth as he backsteps and raises his fist. "You got a shotgun? I got a shotgun." With the flex of his mechanical fist, he fires both barrels of the twin-barreled scattergun mounted into his metal forearm, blasting shot into Carver's face. Magnus spits. "Your kind has never had an original idea. You just pilfer from the labors of honest, hard-working folks, stealing their lives like parasites that you are." Flesh and tusks shredded, Carver launches forward with a series of wild slashes that bite into Magnus's armor. Opening wounds across his chest and legs, he staggers backwards, unable to keep up with the Pharaoh's onslaught. The Pharaoh leader is clearly elated. Carver has an empire. Everyone will witness Carver's greatness. "You got about 3.5 seconds left before your little empire is going to be looking for a new emperor," Magnus says. Focusing his arcane power inward, he infuses his attacks with a supernatural force, slashing Carver's sword aside, then pummeling him with a series of blows from Magnus's prosthetic fists, each time bidding the Pharaoh backward towards the meat thresher where it spins its wheels, unable to disengage from the entangled chains of Invictus's flail. "Let her rip, Vic," Magnus's shouts above the noise. Even though he knows the warjack hears his thoughts clearly in his mechanical mind, Invictus revs its scrap saw and brings it down upon the chains binding the flail to his fist. A hail of sparks flies around the warjack as he severs the links. Freed from Invictus's arm, the meat Thresher's crusher begins to spin, but the warjack stoops down, pushing his right shoulder into the crusher, letting the battle engine gnash its way over the warjack's back, before Invictus implodes upward to his full height, flipping the Thresher onto his back. Carver barely dodges the flaming wreck before it lands on top of him, but he uses Magnus's moment of distraction to recover. Nearby, his eviscerated warhog stirs. Drawing on the life force still within it, Carver fills himself with an arcane fury, magically mending his wounds and infusing himself with renewed power. Carver is all-powerful. He glances over his shoulder at the warjack, 20 yards back, wary of being caught between the warcaster and his massive war machine. But Invictus is mangled beyond any capacity to fight at the moment. His right arm is shredded, and his legs shudder as they struggle to stay standing. "And you have nothing left, Warcaster," Carver snorts before vaulting towards Magnus, with his cleaver hoisted over his head in both hands. Carver is victorious. Magnus steps back, out of reach. "I've got one thing. Just was hoping not to waste it on you." Carver yowls at Magnus's retreat. "Coward! You flee from Lord Carver. The bringer of most massive destruction cannot be." Over his raging tempest of snorts and squeals, Lord Carver doesn't hear the warhead launch from the shoulder of Invictus. In the space of a heartbeat, the Obliterator explodes at Carver's feet, blasting a crater in the earth and engulfing the Pharaoh in a blazing mushroom cloud. "This little piggy should have stayed at home," Magnus mutters as he limps towards Invictus. The warjack hisses steam and clings forlornly. Magnus pats the machine's armored thigh, inspecting the damage. "Don't worry, we'll get you fixed up." "Not bad for an old-timer," Kane saunters towards them. He holds a fresh tankard for each hand and offers one to Magnus. "Thanks. You never said why you were here," Magnus says, taking the mug. "Same to you. To put that pig in the ground," Kane says, tipping his mug towards Magnus before taking a sip. Magnus scowls. "Can't you lend a hand then?" "That's the thing about wearing the livery. No bonuses for going out of my way. You know that." Kane admired the damage across nearly every inch of Invictus. "I would have cut you in." Magnus tips the tinker back, draining it. "I don't get it, Mags. There's no amount of money that makes all of this worth the pain," Kane says, scrouching at his scalp. "You've got no idea to fight for. You're long past having anything to prove. What the hell, man? Give yourself a rest." Magnus looks up at Invictus and wags his head towards the Lux End. "I can't." He trails off as he turns his back and slowly limps back towards the tavern. "You can't what?" Kane says, shaking his head confused. "I can't." Magnus pauses for a moment, letting Invictus catch up to him. "I just can't stop."